Coming to you from Austin, Texas on this sunny but fading day, it's Color Commentary, and we are Michael Petchik.
And Adrian Guarzales.
And today we are joined by Alex Ullman of GatheringMagic.com. Hello, Alex.
Hey guys, how you doing today?
Oh, we're doing okay. We just finished dinner, quickly whipped up some pizza, and now we're sitting here to record.
And we are very happy to have you.
Yes, we are very happy to have you as our first guest on the podcast.
Well, I'm really happy to be here.
All right, so we're recording this a little bit earlier in our schedule than we usually would, so we don't... Normally, this is where we talk about our F&Ms and how they went and move on with it. We don't really have any F&M results to discuss, but we're going to get right into it. We're not going to do really a deck tech per se, but Alex has been kicking around some ideas involving the recently spoiled It of the Horrid Swarm from, not Shadows, Eldritch Moon. There we go.
Sailor Eldritch Moon.
Okay.
That's awful.
I make no apologies for who I am.
So, yeah, just for those of you who don't know, It of the Horrid Swarm is one of these really neat, really kind of complexly designed cards from Eldritch Moon. It's a colorless creature. It's a 4/4 for 8 colorless. When you cast it, you put 2/1/1 insect tokens into play. So, you're thinking, well, first of all, it's one of the first cast triggers we have in Pauper, which is really neat because it gets around counter spells, which is always awesome. So even if they spend an exclude on it, you're kind of trading evenly because, Raise the Alarm is a card, and you're trading a little bit of tempo in that they're spending 3, you're spending 8, but they're getting rid of a 4/4, but you still get 2/1/1. So that's really great. It's something that Pauper doesn't have, is what amounts to an uncounterable threat. But it also has this thing called Emerge, which is this new ability from Eldritch Moon, which says that you can sacrifice a creature to reduce the emerge cost by that creature's converted mana cost. And that's a really fancy way of saying you get a discount.
Yeah, and people had a lot of trouble when this mechanic was first spoiled, like kind of gripping what it actually meant, I noticed. Because it is kind of unintuitively worded.
I didn't realize that you got a price difference at first.
Yeah, no, the obvious target for this would be some sort of I know a lot of people talked about going delve creatures into Emerge, but it seems like they managed to keep the power level pretty fair on these. Is that something you'd agree with?
In Pauper, absolutely. The other one's Wretched Grip, which is 7 for a 3/4 flyer that draws a card when it's cast, but its Emerge is 5 and a U. So, you can sacrifice a Spider Golem and get a 3/4 for a single blue mana, because you can't reduce colored mana costs with these spells. But one thing that might actually be better is if you're playing this in Delver, not that you should, is to use Wormfang Drake from Judgment to hide maybe a Fairy Miscreant. Wormfang Drake is a 3/4 flying for 2 and a blue, but when it comes into play, you have to exile a creature you control, and when it leaves play, you return that creature to the battlefield. So, Fairy Miscreant into Wormfang Drake into Wretched Grip now maybe gives you a 1/1 flyer that draws you a card, and the 3/4 flyer that draws you a card, all for the low price of 3 and a blue.
See that's going real deep there. That I was kind of, I was thinking I was living the dream with I'm gonna just pop a Muldrifter into this, and that seems sweet though. potentially 2 cards and a decent amount of flying power seems fine in that situation.
So, but for It of the Horrid Swarm, what kind of cards are you envisioning sacrificing to that creature? What deck does this go in?
It goes in a Fierce Impact deck.
Ooh, okay.
I see.
Okay, I like this.
This is immediately where my mind went, because I think Fierce Impact is one of the premier tutors in the format that doesn't get nearly enough credit. So, just going back, It of the Horrid Swarm has an emerge cost of 6 and a green, so 7. Fierce Impact is a card from Scourge. It's a 1/1 elf mutant. I believe it's a mutant for 2 and a green. It's terrible on base. But when it enters the battlefield, you can tutor for any creature in your library that costs 6 or more. and that's when things get awesome. Because you can get Fierce Impact relatively easily on turn 2, and then get It of the Horror Swarm on turn 3. And
Okay.
now, if your opponent doesn't really have anything, if they're flat-footed, they've spent turns developing their board, trying to get their Drake mana set up, you have 6 power. That is a 3-turn clock with your elves on the board.
So are you envisioning this going into maybe that mono green Tron list that plays Fierce Hidden Path anyway, or are you thinking this develops a whole new archetype?
So I don't think it develops a whole new archetype. I'm really, really high on green ramp strategies. And whether that is with Tron or with Arbor Elf and Voyaging Satyr with, what are the cards called? Utopia Squall and Loudgrowth, or whether it's with some of the new cards, like Uvenwald Abomination, Uvenwald Captive and Overgrown Battlement. Is a 1 green defender, 1/2 werewolf that taps for a green. Overgrown Battlement is 1 of the green for an 0/4 defender that taps to add a green for each creature with defender you control. And then you can also throw in Wall of Roots, which is an 0/5 defender where you can put on -0, -1 counters because Mirage was crazy. That would bring to your mana pool. So suddenly, you have all these options to accelerate early. So that way, you can, Fierce Empath out something early. Overall Captive transforms for, I believe, 7 mana into a 4/6, which in Pauper is a very reasonable threat that dodges Flame Slash. So suddenly you have this great way to turn an early game development, immediately jump your mid-game into huge monsters. And there isn't really a deck in Pauper besides Affinity that does that. And the great thing is, Affinity is incredibly vulnerable to this card called Gorilla Shaman, which, if you're playing Ramp, you can easily play.
That's not a card.
Okay. So you're envisioning some sort of like big mana deck that just kind of spends its first maybe 2-3 turns ramping, and then all of a sudden just turn 4 or so just explodes into these huge threats that most decks would have a problem dealing with.
Yeah, I'm ideally, I haven't worked out all the nuances yet, but turn 1 Elf, turn 2 Empath, turn 3 Hard Swarm is your basic ideal opening. Now, you're probably going to run cards like Thermokarst, which is the green Stone Rain, or Reap and Sow, which kind of does land destruction and gets you a land, or really hard to pronounce word, Acid Moss, which can destroy a land and get you a forest, or maybe even a card that I'm really, really excited about right now, Reclaiming Vines, which is from, I think it's Battle for Zendikar. It's 2 green, destroy target land, enchantment, or artifact.
Okay.
It's just creepy for old-timers like me. But it does so much. It hits Tron pieces. It hits Prophetic Prism. It hits Curse of the Bloody Tomb. It hits Mirror Enforcer. It does enough that it might be worth a card. And if you're doing Thermokarst into it, it might be good enough. Now, there are other things you can do in a deck like this. You can run Red Green for Fault Grinder, another card you can fetch immediately with Fierce Empath, which is 4/4 trample for 6 in a red. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target land, but it has a vote for 4 in a red. But that puts it into a completely different realm of deck, because Evoke is a sacrifice trigger, and Bloodbringer will trigger when you evoke something, which is also awesome.
Okay. So we're going to some pretty deep spots here, and
We'll go back to It of the Hard Swarm. And basically, the goal is to have a hyper mono deck. And this is a style of deck that Zvi Moshowitz, the Hall of Famer, really put forward. The most famous example of this was Mythic, which was a Pro Tour deck from a number of years ago. I think it was Alara Block and Zendikar Block standard.
Yes.
The goal was to accelerate from Noble Hierarch into Lotus Cobra, into Sovereigns of Lost Alara, or Rafik of the Many, and then attack. Oh, by the way, now there's Eldrazi conscription on the battlefield, and you're dead. I did this a little while ago with green-white ramp I think this was original Innistrad standard, where there were plenty of mana elves, and you would try to accelerate into a very quick Colonian Hydra. And basically, you have two kinds of cards in your deck. You have mana, and you have threats. And the best cards are ones that do both. So a card like, going outside the realm of Pauper, Noble Hierarch is mana, because it taps for blue, green, or white. But it's also a threat because it adds to your Exalted. It adds damage through your Exalted trigger. And really, unfortunately, Pauper has not had a card that can weaponize mana in the same way that some of these other formats do. But with Overwhelmed Abomination and with Inner the Hard Swarm, what you have are two cards that turn your investment in mana early into threats late. And that's what really, really excites me about the upcoming release.
Okay. That all seems good to me. I mean, I was kind of underwhelmed with It of the Horde Swarm just because 4/4 is kind of right on the cusp of bodies that are kind of acceptable in this format. Although I'm kind of coming around on it because Flame Slash hasn't been seeing a whole ton of play because it's, I kind of didn't want to talk about this. It's not great with Drake in the meta.
Interesting removal is really bad right now.
Yeah.
It's a huge risk.
Yeah, I don't see it getting that much play. And like, again, I hate to nag on things for months on end, but Gurmag Angler is still very much in the format, and it's still something you do have to account for. But I get, since you do get 6 power total across 3 bodies, you can block it if necessary to kill it. And I don't know, a 4/4 is just kind of big enough. Like, it gives you game against affinity, and there aren't many other decks that play 4 power creatures. So I don't know. I'm kind of warming up to it now that you've kind of laid out this groundwork for like a big mana deck.
It's something Jason Sirichoke, J-Siri84 MTG, and I have talked about a lot, and it's something I definitely going to try. I'm not sure how good it is. I'll be honest. Hypermon needs the right metagame to work, but I think that if Pauper continues along this path where it's very little mid-range with removal, a whole bunch of aggressive strategies, and then combo, which is really what the meta looks like right now. Aggro control decks have taken the control element, taking the position of control in the format. I think the deck could do very well because, again, no matter what, you're getting 2 1/1s from It of the Hard Swarm.
Yes. So we did have a player locally who was toying around with, I believe it was I want to say mono green land destruction ramp, and that deck was really great at just like punishing greedy mana bases. Like, even against a 2-color deck, just going like turn 3 Thermokarst Karoo land was just backbreaking.
And his win condition, and correct me if I'm wrong, was Aurochs. So this just seems like a much better creature package than Aurochs.
The Aurochs herd that tutors more copies of itself, and I think he had like a one of Ulamog's Crusher in there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Aurochs herd, it's the traditional endgame for a deck like this, but the problem is that you're paying 6 mana for a 4/4 that gets you another 6 mana 4/4. It's really slow, and I've played a lot of green ramp decks. I prefer Lano or Sentinel for the 3. That's a 2/3 when it enters the battlefield. You can pay 1 to green to fetch another copy, which then enters the battlefield, and you can pay 1 to green to fetch another copy.
Yep.
Which then enters the battlefield. And so green ramp decks where, it's turn 3, and I had a great draw, and I have 10 power on the board, and I'm not playing Infinity.
Yeah, that does make it. I hadn't thought about the possibility of Fierce Empath in this deck, and that does make it much more appealing to me because that is one of those cards that I used to play online. I used to play Peasant, and they used to have an Eldrazi ramp archetype that ran 4 of Fierce Empath to tutor up big Eldrazi finishers, and I haven't really ever seen that in Pauper. Like, even in like the Tron decks that are trying to get an Ulamog's Crusher online to win, I don't know. It's just, it seems really good and underutilized in this format. I definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think it's because it's almost a format right now where threats are singular in nature. You know, a carapace forger is good enough to win the game left alone. A gourmet angler is good enough to win the game left alone. You know, even something like a peregrine drink, even if it just resolves a 2-3 flyer, can sometimes go the distance and win the game on its own.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess I'm coming around on this, and I haven't played like a good green deck in Pauper that I've ever been happy with because, I don't know, elves never did it for me. I was just like, this feels almost too easy. Like, I want some level of challenge here, but I can definitely see this being something that I test out once we've seen if it can, you know, perform well in the current, admittedly a little screwy meta that's going on.
Well, here's the one thing that we're very hopeful for with the metagame is that A, green does have access to Tangle and Moment's Peace to blunt assaults. It has Pulse of Marasa to gain life. It has Nylea's Disciple, which is really great with all these 1 green mana auras, because that's a whole bunch of life on a 3/3 body. And it has access to Land Destruction, which is not, you know, going to win the game, but it just needs to buy you a little bit of time.
I mean, especially with, like, as I brought up before, like, land destruction is just so punishing against those multicolor decks that are running the Karoo lands. Like, it's just, because I've played like Teachings and the Pig Trinket Mage deck, and those are all decks where Pig Trinket is kind of my pet deck, and I haven't played it for a while because it's just not well positioned right now at all.
We played it the other night. We went 2-3. Come on, Mike. give us some credit.
Yeah, but I definitely feel like land destruction is decently poised in this metagame at the bare minimum. Even though we're seeing a downtick in like the sort of more traditional control deck. You know, I think what is it? Mono black controls at like something like 2% of the meta, and
Percent for the first time in a long time.
yeah, it's I don't know. That's the one thing. Like I am baffled by people who are pointing to the meta as healthy when it's like, yeah, all these decks kind of just dropped to like 2 or 1% of the meta over the course of about a month, and that doesn't seem dreadfully healthy to me.
So the meta is not exactly not healthy. It's just drastically different from anything we've seen before. At least in Pauper. And I think we're going to talk about that a little later, so I don't want to jump the gun. But it's really fascinating because this is the most deck diversity. And I mean that like distinct archetypes, distinct decks doing well, and by well I mean over 2% of the metagame. The best I've seen for a stretch of a month in a long time, but in some way, there's the least amount of strategic diversity. And I'll talk about that a little bit when we start diving deep into the data a little bit more.
Well, I mean, do you have any other sort of for this green deck we've been talking about? Are there any other sort of like spicy, interesting inclusions you were thinking about in there?
No, not really, not this time. I mean, one card I love in these kinds of decks, the first time I ever played a deck like this, I called it Sentinel Green, is Sentinel Spider, because it's a 5-drop, which is a turn clear for playing a deck like this. It's a 4/4 Vigilance Reach.
Yeah, that seems pretty good in a format where like one of our premier threats is a 3/2 flyer.
It doesn't look like it should do a lot. And actually, the original card I had in that slot all those years ago was Nessian Ass.
Okay.
A reach that gets big. But I think that just in general, people like to be really flashy and do cool things. And sometimes people don't realize that the right play in your hexproof deck is to run a planes for your ethereal armor and not rely on monomorphs.
Yeah.
This is cool. Planes works.
Well, I mean, I think we talked about this on Twitter, where you said that you felt that Pauper kind of has a cool things problem, where we do kind of have a tendency to gravitate towards, oh, this is a neat little interaction.
And the biggest problem with this is, in my opinion, the core Skyfisher package in the Jeskai Kitty decks, which is a totally different conversation, I know, but I do think that.
On the kitty decks. That will take another hour, and well, I'm sure the listeners would love a 2-hour podcast. I don't know how you guys.
Oh, trust me.
I'll give a brief segment. Is that with kitty decks specifically, they're chock full of good cards, but the weakness is being shown right now, where they annihilate their own board development and tempo for the sake of incremental advantages. And right now, that's not a place that you can be. And really, it needs the right kind of metagame. When you're sacrificing that much development for cards, it's not good. Yeah, I get it, KD players. You're gonna win games when you go turn 2, Cthulhu Rebirth against a really slow deck, but do you really want to sacrifice a land?
Yeah, it's always been one of those decks where, at first I chalked it up just to me not being able to play it, but then as I went on, I was just like, this just doesn't seem like it's a good deck. It seems really cool, and it feels great to play because you're like, oh, look at all this card advantage. Look at all these neat things I'm doing, and, like, I'm bouncing stuff, and I'm playing it again. And I just kind of realized, like, why am I trying this? It's just not very good at the end of the day.
I mean, you said it begs out. Sometimes just a planes works,
Yeah, sometimes you don't need to get all that fancy. But let's kind of move from this deck tech. And as our first guest on the show, we kind of wanted to give people a little bit of background. We talked that you do write for GatheringMagic.com, and you're also kind of one of the go-to people in terms of actual real good breakdown of the metagame, and while some people don't agree with you necessarily, I feel it's at least good that we have access to hard concrete numbers for where the metagame is, because as I've realized lately, MTG Goldfish is fine for just like a cursory look, but it seems to be just a little bit off on accurately depicting the current meta at this moment. So maybe give us a little bit of background on your role with collecting all this data.
Well, sure. Just a little bit about me. I've been playing Magic since I was about 10 years old. So we're talking 22 years at this point. I grew up in New York, and I still live there, which is one of the ground zero for competitive Magic. I played at neutral ground. I played with Ron David Marshall, and I was at tournaments with old guys like Mike Pastonek and Dave Price and a whole bunch of people that, if you've been playing Magic a long time, these names should sound familiar. But when I went to college, I went to college in central New York, actually led by a very vibrant legacy scene, I found out after the fact. But I was on a budget, and I was looking for a way to be competitive. This was back when Magic Online was still in version 2. And I remember one day, it was in February of 2005, that I remembered reading about a player-run format on Magic Online that was all commons. And I read about it, I went to the official forums at the time, and I figured out how to join, what was then called PC, the Pauper Deck Challenge, and I tested a whole bunch of decks, and I won the first event I entered, and I won, I believe, 2 Armadillo Cloaks and 2 Excludes, and I was hooked. And the deck I designed, which was basically a slide deck, defined the season. And from that point on, I have basically been playing Pauper nonstop, except when I'm, working at a summer camp or away or doing my actual job. And, that's 11 years ago at this point. I was there for when the format got sanctioned. I went to the first Community Cup because of Pauper. When Pauper got sanctioned, the little known fact, they had used an old ban list of ours, which had restricted artifact plans. What Wizards didn't know at the time was about a month before they sanctioned us, we unrestricted the artifact plans but left cranial plating banned. And within a week, they changed it, which really, endeared Wizards to me as a partner in the format. And what ended up happening was I got to watch the format grow. While I didn't always get to play as much, I always was watching, and I was really concerned about the health of the format. And so, way back, 'cause I think originally it was just Cranial Plating, and then I believe they banned Frantic Search before they banned everything else. We were trying to figure out what the best deck in the format was, and this was back in 4-round daily events where we would get 4-0 results and 3-1 results. And my friend at the time, I was living in Westchester, New York, and I was friendly with Seth Byrne, a former professional Magic player, who, you know, was very involved in the stupid green deck from 1996 U.S. Nationals. And we developed a system where we tracked all the daily events. We codified the lists, and we basically saw that, you know, Storm, Grape Shot Storm was the best deck in the format. And what a lot of people don't seem to realize is before Grape Shot, Into New Orleans, and Invinrite were banned together, I supported keeping them in the format. I thought it created a very dynamic, very interesting, very spiky format. I was wrong. I think the format actually got healthier when they left. Now, there were other problems, namely Cloud of Post and Temporal Fissure, and that's really when you started to see the modern era of my data tracking and my Facebook page tracking. What I would do is I would go through and see how many Cloud Post decks there were, and see how many Cloud of Fairy decks there were. Because at that time, Mono Blue Fissure Post was Cloud Post, Glimmer Post, the Flicker combo as we know it today, equally with Cloud of Fairies, and with Temporal Fissure. And that deck was a misery to play against because they got, I don't know, infinite free cap sizes. So, sure, you didn't have to sit through and wait for them to mill you out with Sages, Rodenas, and burn you out with Roman Thunder. But, unless you were playing Hexproof, it was really bad. My big innovation at the time was a travel preparation in Hexproof. So I could put +1/+1 counters on my decks. And so those cards eventually got banned, and the daily events changed, and then it went to 3-round daily events, and then it went to 5-0 league runs. And so really, the daily event data, when it was 4-0 and 3-1, that was really giving us a really good metagame texture. So we saw what we would go from undefeated, but we also saw what was just lying under the surface. And that kind of informed a lot of the information on how much I base my discussion today. You know, when I say that Delver's been a dominant deck for a long time, it's because it's been around for a long time. When I talk about, you know, today specifically when I talk about Peregrine Drake decks, they don't start from zero. They're not starting with a tabula rasa. They're not blank. They had this history of dominance just with a different card slotted in, Cloud of Fairies, that really kind of informs what those decks look like today. And so I started doing this analytics kind of to monitor the format health because I didn't think anyone else was doing it. And so it's also fun just to look at all these deck lists and see what people are doing and trying to understand what their thought process is. And I think the big shortcoming, you know, we'll get to this I'm sure, the big shortcoming with league deck lists is that to go 5-0, you need a little bit of luck. And so, unless a deck goes 5-0 over and over again, you're not sure if it's someone just ran hot for a day, or if the deck is legitimately good. You know?
Well, on top of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we don't even get all of the 5-0s anymore, do we?
We never got all the 5-0s. We get an average of 10 a day, a maximum of 10 a day. I don't know what happens on the days when we don't get 10. I do know that the system wherein the deck lists are fed from Magic Online to the exporter sometimes works. I have a good relationship with Lee Sharp. That's what I'm knowing. It usually fixes itself. But yeah, we don't get all the data. But even if we don't get all the data, when we take a macro look at the data, and that's why I divide things up into seasons and weeks instead of just an event. When you take a macro look at the data, you start to get a real sense of the texture of the metagame. So that's why one thing I always have a distaste for is when someone goes, but it went 5-0. I don't need time for you to go 5-0.
Well, yeah, I mean, we see like almost every week there's some sort of strange deck that shows up. Like a while ago, there was some, I want to say it was a kitty deck, but I might be wrong, that was running Avarax as like a top end. It was some white-red deck.
It was a red-white Flamin' Inspector deck, and I actually thought that was inspired. I think Avarax is a very good threat that is underplayed right now. It's just, it's the Red Squadron Hawk, but it's really slow.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just very interesting because I do see a lot of people pointing out, you know, oh, but it went 5-0, and like, yeah, that isn't a great example because like for the big thing everyone was going nuts about besides Peregrine Drake and Eternal Masters was, you know, how are we going to make Nimble Mongoose work? Because it's legacy playable, so it's got to be good here, right?
Don't get me started.
But like, I definitely think that's one of those things where we've kind of seen that there's only been, I think, 2 5-0s so far with that list. And
It's very good. I think it's a good start, but I think also Nimble Mongoose is a very high power card. I think there's a home for it in Pauper. I don't know what it is yet. A 3/3 Shroud is really good. It's also really bad when other people are playing 4/4s and 5/5s. One reason it's so good in Legacy is because, well, one, you can clear out a path with Bold and Abrupt Decay and any Manpair of really great removal, but the creatures are smaller in Legacy. And you'll notice that as time's gone on, Nimble Mongoose is getting more and more squeezed out of that format by things like Tarmogoyf, by things like Gurmhead Angler and Tassiger. So I think that Nimble Mongoose is one of those cards that's going to see fringe play, but it's like Arrogant Worm. Arrogant Worm, we thought it was going to be a world leader. We thought it was going to be a game changer. It's done almost nothing in the format.
I mean, it shows up in Tortured Existence. That's, you know, not nothing, I guess.
If you're winning with Arrogant Worm and Tortured Existence, you're really trying too hard. If you can win with other cards.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I don't know. I just think it's very interesting because a lot of people, because I'm involved with like organizing Pauper events locally, you know, a lot of people will ask like, how do I get into this format? And I do kind of always point them towards MTG Goldfish just because it's simple, it's available, you know, it's not a whole ton of searching, but I've always kind of felt that it doesn't quite hit the meta quite right because, for example, you know, recently there was a discussion about banning Peregrine Drake on the Reddit, and I cited, you know, that by my estimation, it was making up 19% of the meta. And that was just by me going on MTG Goldfish and adding them all up. And then later down in the thread, I saw that you had posted that by your calculations, it was closer to 24%, which is actually a pretty decent margin of error. Like 3% is not nothing. So I do think it's really interesting that it's 5. Oh yeah, it's 5%. Wow. Oh boy. Oh, this has been a day, I guess. I can't do basic math here.
Let's actually talk about Eternal Masters season and how I track the data. Is that I go by seasons. You know, a new set gets released, boom, that's when the new season starts. And it gets a little wonky with things like, with Eldritch Moon, the set's going to be released officially on a Friday, but I tend to do my metagame write-ups on Wednesdays, so there might be a couple-day crossover or whatever. But, you know, I have, you know, my next metagame write-up, you know, we're recording this on a Tuesday, is going to come tomorrow afternoon when you get the complete week of data. So, you know, the first week of this season, Drake made up 30% of the metagame. That's a lot. And it was, you know, oh no, are we in for this again? Week 2, it dropped significantly to under 20%, 19.67% of the metagame. And I was like, oh, things are okay. You know, the next week it was 20.59. I'm like, okay, it's staying around 20%. That's a good thing. That told me that the meta was adjusting in a way where it could be healthy. And then last week happened. It shot back up to 26.15%. So down, up a little bit, up a lot. I'm like, oh, Okay, well, the meta's still adjusting, it's evening out. Let's see what the next week holds. So it was up to 26.15. With 1 day left in this week, Drake is at 34.62% of the undefeated metagame.
Oh boy.
So, if Drake doesn't appear at all in the standings tomorrow, it will have its second best week at 29.14% or something like that. One appearance, it will be the best week ever for Drake so far, where it will top 30%. So, when you think about it, that is starting to enter problem territory. Now, one thing that's really interesting to me is that people have not really, at least in the published lists, we haven't really adapted to the threat that is Peregrine Drake combo. And by that I mean, I'm still seeing way more copies of Flame Slash than Lightning Bolt. I'm not seeing, ostensibly bad cards, I did the air quotes there, like Last Breath, which exiles everything in the combo. Yeah, it costs you 4 life. Who cares? You exile their combo piece. Not that we should, but maybe it's time for some decks to start running Relic of Progenitus Bane, or other graveyard exile cards being.
And why do you think that this hasn't occurred yet? Do you think that people aren't taking the threat seriously? Do you think people just hate change?
I think that Pauper is split, at least online, into 2 big camps. I think there's the competitive camp. The spikes, the people who are playing leagues, and this is their competitive outlet, and they want to win, and they want to do everything they can to win. So they're going to play the best deck, or the deck they feel gives them the best chance to win. And whether that's the best deck or some really neat brew, that's what they're going to play. But then there are the casual competitive folks. And what I mean by that is I don't think they're not competitive. Not that I think they're very competitive, but they're competitive on their own terms. And, well, I'm a goblins player, I want to play goblins. Or I'm an elves player, I'm going to play elves. Or I'm a combo player, I'm a control player. And this is what I play. I think that there are people who buy into one Pauper deck, and that's what they're going to play. And they're going to jam games, and they're going to try and 3-2 or 4-1 a lead and keep going. And when I discuss the metagame, I'm a little price insensitive. I have a job. I've been writing for websites for over 10 years. And so when the new cards come out, I go and buy all the new commons I may need. It's never very expensive. I think I spend, under $10 per set. But I don't know what everyone's financial situation is. So I think that it's a lot easier for someone who is, say, a Goblins player to go out and just buy the new Goblins cards. Buy the burn spells they may need, buy these things, and just go like that. Do that. I think that it's I think that it's this real dichotomy, and you see it a little bit in the discussion that Reddit has. Is that there are some people who are just, well, this is what I play. I think it's a good deck. This is why, even if the data doesn't support it.
Yeah, no, I definitely can feel that. I mean, while I'm more of a paper player, there are definitely people who show up with that one deck that they do really love, and I can definitely see that being something where people are just kind of saying, well, it worked 3 weeks ago, why won't it work now, and not really accounting for this fairly drastic shift in meta.
The big thing is that for so long, a deck like Mono Black Control was never, for a brief period of time, it was the best deck in the format. I think for one season I tracked, it was the best deck in the format, and this was pre-Treasure Cruise. But when one of the best decks in the format, with one of the single most powerful cards, regardless of whether or not you like it, Mono Black Control runs Grey Merchant, and it is a very powerful card. When a deck like that is not seen play, it worries me a little bit. It tells me that something is off. It tells me that the metagame has shifted to a point where a game-ending 5 drop is not enough unless it's Drake. And that is telling to me. And whether that means that, you need to start writing Elves of Deep Shadow and Black-Green to make it work, I don't know. But that's what is that's when things start to shift. And I think that that's part of the backlash is that some people are like, well, I can't play my deck anymore. Some people, Elves players are really happy right now because their deck is the best it's been in years.
Yeah, it's sitting right up there with, it's close to Delver now, isn't it?
Let me check. My cumulative stats have Elves at 6.86% of the metagame. Delver I have at 8.17. So it's up.
Yeah, it's definitely up there. And, you know, Elves is always kind of like, when it does well, it seems to do fine, but, you know, it does kind of just get hosed by certain sideboard cards. Like an Elect Trickery can be backbreaking for them. But it appears that things are going well if you're playing Elves.
Is that it has always been able to go wide really well, but now with Elvish Vanguard it can go tall, which pulls up a huge hole in that deck's strategy.
Yeah, I mean, if you get the combo turn with that on board, you kind of don't care if you lose a lot of the other stuff, unless they've got an edict to follow it up with. I don't know, that seems like a pretty good position, because that thing can get very large very quickly.
Yeah, it's tied with Hex 2 for the third or fourth most popular deck in the format so far this year.
Wow, that's just totally bizarre, and that's kind of what I was pointing to.
Maybe Delver and then Hexproof and Elves neck and neck.
Like, that's kind of what I've always been pointing to in these discussions is, you know, the meta looks very, very different, and a lot of decks that weren't seeing a lot of play are doing very well now. So while, you know, I might be a little opposed to change, I don't know, this feels like a little bit more drastic of a change than is necessarily that great for the format.
So
we can talk about what the change is.
I mean, from my point of view, where I'm, you know, just looking at simple statistics that I can find easily, I'm seeing a downtick in traditional sort of control decks, and I'm seeing that fast aggro and combo are doing well in this, better than they used to, and kind of a bit of a downtick for the tempo decks as well. But
so if we want to look at last season as kind of any kind of indication, so we're talking from the release of Shadows of Innistrad to the release of Eternal Masters Online. What you have is Delver was far and away the best deck. It took up just over 1/5 of the metagame. That would be cause for concern, except I don't think there's any individual card that's bannable in Delver. You know, take away Ponder or Queerwing. Well, they have the other one where they have Brainstorm, where they have Thought Scour. I don't know what the right card to take out of that deck is to kind of bring it back to Earth without neutering it entirely, or anything that would really work. Stompy was next, with just almost 16%. And then you see, you know, a whole bunch of decks in the 8%, 7% range. You know, Mono Black was 8.1%. You know, Jeskai Midrange or Jeskai Kitty or Kubilta Jeskai was 4.66%. Affinity was 6.88%. So you see a cluster at the top, kind of a scrum in the middle, and then, you know, a whole bunch of decks at the bottom. What gives me a little bit of, makes me a little hesitant about this minigame is that Elves looked great at the start. You know, it was up there with the other great decks. It's now down to about 7%. Last season, it finished at 3.44%. And if it keeps trending down, you know, what you're going to see is one of the better decks in the format at fighting Drake not really doing its job.
But I also think it's a little, you know, interesting to see Affinity doing as well as it does, because it's been a strong contender for a long time, definitely. Like, Adrian, you play Affinity basically every week.
I would be what Alex has dubbed a casual competitive, yes.
Well, you do know the ins and outs of the deck, but it's doing very well, and I was trying to nail down what it was about that deck that's kind of letting it do so well in this format, and I think the closest I could come up with is just the fact that it can play the very sort of hyper-aggressive aggro role. Like, sometimes you do just have the turn 3 or 4, like, drop 4 Mirror Enforcers on the board, and if your opponent doesn't have an answer for all of them, you're just going to run away with it. And the other thing is it just has the combo out in the form of ATOG and Fling.
Right, and I agree with you, and I think something else that Alex touched on a little earlier, correct me if I'm wrong, is you said there's not enough copies of Lightning Bolt, but I play it, that, Affinity is a deck that plays 4 copies of better Lightning Bolt, and I have Lightning Bolt in my sideboard, along with Pyroblast and Relic. So,
I think one reason that Affinity is doing so well this year is that the decks that can best utilize a Gorilla Shaman aren't really seeing that much play. When you look at the red decks that are out there, it's goblins and goblins light. It's goblins and red deck wins. And while both those decks are 100% capable of running Gorilla Shaman, neither one really can or should. I think, they can and maybe they will, but Smash to Smithereens is a little bit better in the Red Deck Wins version. And so what we end up seeing is that a lot of the decks that were Affinity's Natural Predator were kind of pushed out of the format by Drake. One of the best decks against Affinity just in general is not Black Control. It has cheap removal, it has deadweight for ATOG, it has all these ways to gain life and blunt yourself from Affinity, but when that stopgap is kind of pulled out from under the metagame, what ends up happening is that Affinity, which is normally a viable option but a containable threat, it can take over. And I don't think there's anything to go away from Affinity. I don't think, the artifact lands can be banned. I don't think, ATOG and Fling are too good together. I don't think it's Mirror Enforcer. I don't think it's Carapace Forger. Because, again, Gorilla Shaman exists in the format. It's just a matter of finding a way for the format to work wherein it can do this, wherein it can do its job.
Well, I think you kind of touched on something that, we've discussed before, is that there are some very powerful sideboard cards in this format. And Gorilla Shaman's definitely one of those. It's admittedly narrow, but in some decks, it just shuts down the Affinity player. It's one of the best draws in the entire deck after sideboarding. So, I guess one of the things I had sort of thought about is, not to harp again, but with Drake, is there a good sideboard card that's going to actually have that same effect where, you're not devoting 10 out of 15 sideboard slots to this one matchup, but you do have kind of that silver bullet in there?
I mean, last breath, 1 and a white, exile target creature with power 2 or less that creature's controller gains 4 life. It is one card that kind of does that. Unmake is another one. I think cards like Syncopate, limited X, counter target spell unless its controller pays X. If it's countered this way, exile it. Fairy Trickery, 1 blue for a counter target non-fairy spell, exile it. What is the name of that card? It's from Battle for Zendikar, I think.
Complete Disregard.
Complete Disregard, actually, yeah, but I'm not thinking of that one. It's a blue one. It's a counter spell.
Oh,
Is it Spell Shrivel?
yes.
Spell Shrivel.
counter unless they pay 4.
Huh?
Counter unless they pay 4, I want to say.
I think it's 4. It's 3 or 4.
Yeah.
These are all reasonable cards to play. I mean, they're not cards you really want to play, but they're reasonable sideboard cards. The issue is that Pauper has shifted from a sorcery speed format to an instant speed format. And you can see this kind of in the decline of mono black, the decline of blue-black teachings, the decline of regular Tron, which was so reliant on Flame Slash to operate. And yeah, the decks that do well tend to be pretty good against these kind of sorcery speed removal decks. that's the entire reason I think that this red deck wins, the haste red deck, even exists. It's basically immune to sorcery speed removal. Sorcery speed removal just is so bad right now. And without, without really good, without multiple good, cheap instant speed removal options, I'm not sure we're going to really see a change. Now, the options exist, it's just people have to be willing to play by the new rules of the format. And with Pauper being eternal, it's sometimes very hard to adapt to the new rules.
Yeah, I mean, people definitely get stuck in their little ruts and kind of don't want to change. Like, I know I'm still like hesitant to cut Chainer's Edict out of lists, even though I know full well it does stone nothing against Drake most of the time, just because
it's such a good card.
Exactly.
There's so much power in there, but is it really worth it? And I don't have that answer. The thing is, the other thing is we're only seeing the 5-0s, so Chainer's Edict could be great against the 3-1 decks, the 2-2 decks. The decks in the 0-2 bracket that you get matched up against when you're 1-0, which happens sometimes. But can you really afford that if you want to go 5-0? And that's the question you have to ask. Do you want to go 5-0? Or are you okay going 3-2, 4-1, occasionally spike, occasionally going 2-3? I played mono white aggro for most of Shadows Over Innistrad season. Really, it was Dragon Inspector, Squadron Hawk, and Course Skyfisher. I played Razor. I won something like 72% of my matches over 10 league runs. But I never won 5-0. Because
I do definitely think that there's like a little bit of an issue with only getting that 5-0 result, because yeah, as you pointed out, like it does matter, like as much as seeing who came in quote unquote first matters, you kind of want to be able to see the bigger picture just a little bit. Like,
well, there's a reason we do a top 8 in most formats, right? It's just this league results are so focused on the 5-0s.
Yeah, and
I think that in this instance, Pauper, in this instance and many others, Pauper's at the mercy of Magic at large. Are you guys familiar with limited resources?
yes.
So, in constructed resources, basically Marshall and his co-hosts have come up with this idea of the time-traveling supercomputer and the machine. And the machine represents the collective minds of every Magic player trying to win as fast as possible. Back when I started, the machine was slow, it was hand-cranked, it was hamster wheels. And it might take a full season for an optimized list to show up. Like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, even in the early days of the internet, before Magic Online was this huge grinding device, there would be diversity in standard. You wouldn't know what the best deck was. Maybe in a year you could look back and find out what that best deck is. But now, that's gone. The best deck is basically found within the first 2 weeks of the format, if not the first week. And, you can look at current standard with green-white tokens. That deck won the Pro Tour, and it has been the best deck in standard, with very little exception, for most of the season. And so, when you have that machine in standard, in modern, in legacy, not so much in vintage, but you have it in these formats where there are paper events, real-life events, huge Grand Prix, PTQs, RPTQs, Magic Online qualifiers, and challenges, and leagues. That's a whole bunch of data. And restricting access to the best lists in that form, in those, is in some way okay, because you want to kind of encourage that discovery moment when you play. That's a very good thing for Magic as a brand, and to keep Magic going. It is terrible for Pauper, because we really have 1.5 sources of information. We have the league data, and then we have whatever else is out there. And there's more than there's ever been before. Card Kingdom does Rags to Riches, which gives us a lot of data. There's Paupergeddon in Italy, which is this huge regular series of pauper events that routinely attract over 125 people. But those are two tournament series on opposite ends of the globe. You know, when you look at what streamers are doing, Card Hoarder did their Pauper Challenge, and the decks run very good by and large. You know, no one played Dover. And don't remember if anyone played Mono Black Control. There were multiple Rebeltron lists. On the converse, you have Brandon Bueller, who's doing the Pauper Gauntlet of Greatness right now. And, you know, I was lucky enough to help him choose the deck lists. You know, I chose the deck lists before Eternal Masters was officially released, so I had to kind of bake a lot for them. The Elves deck turned out to be pretty darn good. The Drake deck, not so much. The Red-Green deck was terrible. But we don't have the same machine, the same grind of players available to Standard or Modern or Legacy, and so it takes longer for the format to develop. And giving Pauper access to more lists would be a good thing. But I don't think it's ever going to happen. I don't think they can favor us over other people, and it stinks a little bit in the data respect, but I understand why they do.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they are kind of a business, and, you know, they got to make money. And I know that we're not the ones who are buying boxes of boosters. Like, we're not a big monetary draw for them. So, you know, it's nice to know now that, you know, with that post from the Magic developers blog, that they do pay attention to us, because they definitely acknowledged that had they known about Cloud of Fairies getting banned, they might not have given us Peregrine Drake. But
Adam Kozak is not the first person to publicly acknowledge that either. Adam Bergen did it with the Vintage Masters spoilers when we got Goblin General and the Madness card, Circular Logic and Arrogant One.
Yeah, like I it's clear that they, you know, care about us in some regards. Like, we still do get bannings when it's necessary, but I can definitely see, like, you know, Pauper not being forefront on a whole bunch of people's minds at Wizards.
I think that's actually changing a lot. You know, I talked a little bit about green-white tokens. It's really good when other formats are boring, because then streamers gravitate.
Yeah. And I mean, they did it in the CSL as well, right? They
Yes, I remember I got many deck requests on that one.
I think I saw something. You said like 7 out of the 10 competitors asked you for some level of help.
It's 3.
Oh, well, still.
No one asked us, so.
Yeah, no, you got 3 more than us.
About is Paul Chion actually asked me for a deck, and I referred him to Jason and his Velocitron deck, which at the time was running, I think it was running Drake now. And what annoyed me is that he went and ran the blue-black teachings deck with no win conditions, and he lost to one land spy somehow.
Yep, if I remember correctly, he boarded out his only win cons in Game 3 or something. Just
2.
Yeah, something catastrophic like that. And it was just like, okie doke, you probably could have avoided this, but okay.
People have told me to give him the rub-ins, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to be friendly with him.
Yeah.
He's a great guy.
Listening to this call.
All right, so we're coming up right on around an hour, so I've got one last question for you before we kind of do our little outro here. And this is something that I like to ask people just in general. If you could have one card rarity shifted to common, regardless of health of the format, what would it be? What's that one card that you just want to play with in Pauper?
So, here's the thing. I was going to write comments about, I hate this question, I never like answering it, but then I realized that there are 2 cards. And I have 2 because one is a little more real than the other. So, the first card I really have always wanted to see at common was recently printed at common in paper, but not online. and it's fourfold. Because it's common in Zendikar versus Eldrazi dual deck, but it was the first dual deck to not be released on Magic Online. And so Pauper Online doesn't have it, and I play almost basically exclusively online Pauper. So I think fourfold, less so now. It's not a very good card right now because it is sorcery speed and hitting 2 1/1s is not as important as it used to be. But that is a sweet card that I would love to have access to. So my real answer is Ulcerate. I want Ulcerate so bad, especially right now.
All right, just to save us from a quick Google search, what does Ulcerate do? Because I can swear I've heard the name, but I cannot for the life of me come up with the effect.
It is a black instant uncommon, I believe from Magic 2015, which everyone had Convoke. It is black for an instant. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. You lose 3 life.
Okay. Yeah.
That'd be pretty good in this meta.
It would be very good in this meta. And also, I think it's actually... It's a little strong for standard sets at common, but I could completely see it in the next Model Masters, the next Vintage Masters, or Eternal Masters at common. Because Tragic Slip is very close. Vendetta, not that Vendetta is, really a great example of a card, because it's from Arcadian Masks and from Rise of the Eldrazi. Rise being one of those post-New World Order sets that kind of didn't adhere to New World Order, which is why it's so full of good cards for Pauper. But it's right in that area where it's good, but it was never a game breaker, and I think it creates very interesting limited environments where it's much better early than late for multiple reasons. It's a little above the power curve for common, but I could definitely see it being okay for common without destroying limited, and it would definitely help Pauper. It would give other decks access to a good way to kill a trick. Because right now it's Lightning Bolt and others. I think that cards like Vendetta are a little too risky because of all the aggro going around.
All right, that was a surprisingly in-depth answer, and I guess I shouldn't expect anything else. But as soon as you were talking about that, all I can think of is the decks that are the very aggressive decks already running Vault Scourge in the board and running no black sources, being able to splash this piece of pretty decent removal out of that.
Yeah. So just really quickly before you guys go, if your listeners are not able to find me, or if you don't know who I am, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at NerdToTheCore, NerdTheCore. And then you can also find all the data I talk about. I post it to my Facebook page, facebook.com/NerdToTheCore. I'm on the Reddit. I could not get Nerd to the Core, so I'm Nerd #2 the Core. And I'm at the Pauper Reddit a lot. And my articles go up once a week on GatheringMagic.com. Although don't search my name, because I also do news there, so you'll get a lot of stuff about releases and random things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for getting on with us today. We're just going to go through our little outro here. Special thanks to Pat's Games for giving us a place to play weekly Pauper. Thanks to Elle for the use of his song Quantitative as our theme song. You can find his music on SoundCloud under the name LLL. Please subscribe to us and Alex on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. We're also on iTunes, and if you're subscribed there, please go ahead and leave us a review because it really helps us out. If you have an idea for a discussion topic or a deck list you'd like for us to discuss, you can either use the contact form on our site or email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. I'm Adrian Guarzales.
And I'm Michael Pejek, signing off for Color Commentary.